Hey guys, how you going? So today on VCast Sport, we are going to be talking about the new Super Rugby format, the way that it looks like it's going to be set up from 2022 onwards, and the effects that it's going to have on worldwide rugby. This isn't just going to have an effect on Australia and New Zealand and the Pacific Islands. This is going to have an effect on South Africa. This is going to have a major effect on Argentina, and it's interesting to see what we're going to come out of this, especially considering it's still 2 years away. I don't need to tell you why the Super Rugby is changing. However, it has been leaning this way for a couple of years now. It's not like this is just a massive shock. I think that it was angling this way for quite some time now, but the virus has really forced it into the forefront, and it's forced it down our throats to adjust this competition because it really wasn't working. Overall, the Super Rugby format with the South African teams, Australian teams, New Zealand teams, and Jaguares in Argentina, it just wasn't really up to the standard that I think people really would have been expecting for it to happen over these years. It just never really grew to the area that people really wanted it to. There is some blame to be thrown upon the Australians over the course of the last 20 years, the downfall of Australia. There is also some blame towards South Africa for their decision making over the last 20 years as well, and maybe the tall poppy syndrome of New Zealand really had a major factor here as well. And ultimately, I think this is the conclusion of said format. Now, I can't guarantee that. I'm not inside the organisations themselves. For all I know, Super Rugby could return to having South Africa in 2023 onwards or whatever, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think they're pretty much done here. We've been seeing the last couple of years that they've been angling towards a European exit anyway, and I think this is their way of saying, you know what, we're going to take this direction as well because the situation doesn't favour us there, and I think it favours us here. But anyway guys, let's get into the video and let's talk about the future of the Super Rugby. Alrighty, so to quickly sum up of what I was just saying, South Africa the last couple of years, there's been rumours and murmurs and discussion about South Africa leaving the Rugby Championship and potentially leaving the Super Rugby to take up the European side of things. Now, South Africa is in the Southern Hemisphere, and in regards to World Cups, it's all just been basically Southern Hemisphere teams who have won, besides 1 year in 2003 with England. We're not going to talk about that damn well Johnny Wilkinson. Oh, shit, no. Piece of shit. But it's been really good to have South Africa as a part of the Rugby Championship because it really is the peak of rugby, world rugby, down in the Southern Hemisphere. I know Northern Hemisphere teams are really going to be like, oh, come on, man, England, we're great, Ireland, we're great, Wales, we're great. Not so much now, Wales, by the way, but after the last couple of weeks I've been watching, it really is just a fact. New Zealand have won 3, South Africa have won 3, Australia have won 2, England have won 1. I'm pretty certain that's literally everything there. So it's really been good to have South Africa as a part of this Southern Hemisphere conference, if you could say. Now the problem here though is that South Africa is actually on a better time zone with Europe. So they've been somewhat angling towards getting onto that time zone because it's better for them financially, and we've actually brought a video out about this I think last year, or maybe it was last year, where we were talking about the fact that South Africa wanted to join the Six Nations. Now with South African Super Rugby teams, I'm pretty certain at domestic level, if that happened on an international level, they're going to be going as well. We've already seen some previous Super Rugby teams from South Africa move into Europe, and I just think that overall that side of things, the South African side of things, is going to Europe. Now, in regards to Australia and New Zealand, 2021, I believe that Australia and New Zealand are still doing their domestic competitions. So the Super Rugby DRUA with the New Zealand teams, Hurricanes, Chiefs, Blues, Crusaders, and Highlanders, they're going to be competing with each other, and I think they're going to add in a final this year because it was kind of dead this year with no final. And then with Australia, obviously you got your Brumbies, you got your Western Force, you got your Reds, Waratahs, and your Melbourne Rebels. So those 2 individual domestic competitions will more than likely go ahead like they did this year. However, there is news recently that 2022 may bring in a new style of format where they're going to have the 5 Australian teams, the 5 New Zealand teams, they're going to bring in MOANA PASIFIKA and the FIJIAN DRUA, which has been something that people have been wanting for quite some time. We want to bring in the islands. Fiji is a fantastic rugby nation, whether it be 7s or whether it be 15s. They really are giving it a solid crack. 7s are the best team in the world, and 15s, they are definitely up and coming. So to really get them amongst it and get them involved, especially when their Fijian Drua in the National Rugby Championship has been doing quite well. When they're in the competition, I think they won 2 years ago. Yes, they have a bit of a risky play style, but that's Fijian rugby, man. You know, you come to Fiji and you see them randomly throwing the ball around here, there, everywhere. That's just the way they play. So maybe it might bring a little bit more structure. No, you're never going to get structure with Fiji. You'll never get any more structure with Fiji. But the point of the matter is, they're trying to bring that 5 Australian teams, mix it with the 5 New Zealand teams, and then bring in the islands. Now, Fiji and Drua obviously represent Fiji, and MOANA Pasifika, I'm pretty certain they also represent Fiji, but they're Tonga, Samoa, you know, Cook Islands, Niue, you know, all the Pacific Island nations. So that'll be very interesting, where they have like a collaboration of your Samoans and your Tongans and your smaller minnow nations, where they can really bring it up. Now, I believe they're meant to be based out of New Zealand, because I'm not too sure about the stadium, whether it be in Tonga or Samoa. I don't think they would have the capacity or the ability financially. So they're going to be based in New Zealand. I think Fiji and Drua would more than likely still be based here in Fiji, because that's what they were in the National Rugby Championship when they were doing well. There is Lawanga Park, there is, you know, Lautoka, Suva, Nandi, Rewa. You know, there's places all over the place here that you could utilise as a stadium, just like they have been, which is really, really awesome. Not only is it great for grassroots and great for the country's rugby growth itself, but it's also great for tourism, and especially with everything that's going on right now, once this happens and people are like, you know what, I'm going to go watch the Queensland Reds play Fiji and Drua and get a little cheeky little 2-week holiday here. You know what I mean? I'll get a cheeky 1-week holiday in Fiji. Can you complain with that? So it's going to also help with the tourism factor. So it's a really good boost for multiple reasons here that isn't just rugby. As well, with the actual islands themselves, with the MOANA Pasifika, that's just fantastic too, because it includes everyone. It includes everyone. Now, in the near future, I do think that they would somewhat angle towards bringing in Japan, and we are going to get into Argentina in 2 seconds, but I think Argentina might still come in future-wise, just not yet though, but we're going to talk about that in a second. So I think they're going to try and bring in Japan eventually, because Japan is obviously well and truly growing in the rugby world, and I think that it would be a massive financial boost to the tournament and organisation itself. I think that the Sunwolves were the wrong timing. I think that was the wrong timing to bring that in, and that does kind of lay blame to South Africa in that regard. I think that the Sunwolves were just the wrong timing. It was a bit of a forced venture, and I think if it was done right, we've seen how Japan are when they were in the Rugby Union World Cup. The support was just unbelievable. They definitely could get behind their team, and if it's done right, we could see the same kind of levels for Japan. So let's now try and utilise that passion, that hype that we've just seen from them, and try and grow it to the same size as your football, because they do love their football, as in soccer, by the way. They do love their football. So yes, baby step, you know, relax. Well, in 2022, start off with the inclusion of the islands, which is a big step, but still baby steps, and then obviously we can bring in Japan. And now we're going to move into Argentina, because we could also bring in Argentina, because they are already well established. They need this. Like, they need this Super Rugby. If they don't get included, that is going to be such a... Man, I'd be so disappointed. I'd be real disappointed if they weren't able to come into this competition on a domestic front, because we've seen recently, in recent weeks, that they're truly coming leaps and bounds in regards to their national team, and it would just be such a major setback if they were to lose the Jaguares in the Super Rugby competition, because they would lose that constant year-round performances, the game fitness, match fitness, and player growth, obviously. So there is talk that they could join the South America, or the just American continent, Northern South America rugby competition, but let's be honest here, that's not exactly primo content. That's not really exactly the tournament you want to be a part of. You want to be a part of either the European domestic front, or you want to be a part of the Super Rugby in the Pacific. So I would not suggest Argentina doing that if they obviously had the choice. You can do that. I guess that keeps out match fitness, but it's not like you're playing the Crusaders, not like you're playing the Brumbies, not like you're playing the Islands. You know, it's a real massive downhill fall to that domestic competition in the Americas. So for Argentina, long-term wise, on a national level, I think that being a part of this Super Rugby competition is so crucial and so integral, because they will lose all their track progress. And I think Argentina is quite worried about this, because, like I said, 2022, they weren't included. It was only the New Zealand teams, it was only the Australian teams, and it was MOANA PASIFIKA and FIJIAN DRUA. So they're trying to grow that Pacific Island connection, but they're also forgetting about the Argentinians, who haven't really done anything wrong here. And in comparison to South Africa, who utilised this pandemic as a reason not to come to Australia. I know the South Africans are like, oh no, we couldn't come restrictions-wise. Yes, you could have. Yes, you damn well could have. But South Africa chose not to, because of other reasons, and we're not going to get into it because we've already said that plenty of times on streams. But Argentina, they did have the courage, they did have the balls, they did have the ability to come to Australia, and they've put on a damn well show. They've beaten New Zealand, they've drawn with Australia, you know, they're playing some good rugby right now despite not having played in over a year's time. So I think that that's shown that they're committed to the cause. I think that's shown they're committed to continuously growing this sport and this passionate country for rugby, and they really want to make sure that they keep in the good books with, say, Australia and New Zealand to be able to put the Jaguares into this Super Rugby competition. I would love that. I would absolutely love if you did have the Jaguares in. But yes, it would come down to the travel restrictions eventually being let up. Otherwise, Argentina would not be able to be based in Buenos Aires. I think that's probably a main problem right now, is that Buenos Aires would not be able to have a home game. I think that with the Pacific, they're going to organise a somewhat bubble between these countries because it's pretty okay overall right now. It's pretty okay in regards to the pandemic in these said countries. So I guess you could create somewhat of a bubble where you can travel in between, and this is including the public as well. I believe they are talking about this for the future, in the very near future, like 2021. So I think that that's probably the main problem with Argentina, and they probably wouldn't get any home games unless they were brought in, and I could highly doubt that they're going to get brought into that said bubble. So I think if they're going to be in the competition, they would need to be like MOANA PASIFIKA, based in New Zealand or Australia, where they play their home games out of for the near future anyway. So I think, yeah, that's probably the main problem with Argentina. I really personally would love them to stay. I love the passion they bring, and I really love the style of rugby they play as well. And I just think that it would be a massive downfall of Argentinian rugby if they don't get the opportunity to come to the Super Rugby and play with New Zealand, Australia, your islands, and potentially Japan in the near future. I think that would be a very disappointing end to what was growing for Argentina. Look, it's going to be very interesting to see how it goes. Very interesting. I know interesting is a really overused word, because sometimes things aren't interesting and people say it's going to be interesting to see how it goes. And it's like, well, not really. But this is very interesting because the Super Rugby format that we've been used to for decades now is going to completely and utterly change in front of our eyes. And I know next year doesn't really change too much compared to what we saw this year. But yeah, long-term wise, I really think this is going to be a completely different tournament to what you've come to know. But anyway, guys, that is going to do it for today's video. Definitely smash that thumbs up button if you have not already. Subscribe if you're new around here. We're always streaming. You know, we do the Tri-Nations. We'll be doing the Autumn Nations Cup, whether it be rugby or NFL or, you know, Australian buddy cricket coming up soon. We're streaming everything. So definitely hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Get involved. Love chatting with you guys about all the sports live during the game, as long as it's not buddy Kiwis talking shit to Wallabies. So we beat you last time we played you. You're only good as your last game. You're only as good as your last game, Kiwi. No, we're not talking about the Blazekippaxross Cup. We're just talking about the one game, alright? Just one game. Shut up. Like I said, guys, that's going to do it for today. Appreciate you as always, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Catch you later. So